Hey, what's going on, y'all? Eric Moultrie here with Code Red Conversations. We're going to jump right in to the show today. Let me know, for those of you who are watching, who are in the chat, let me know if you have any audio or visual issues. But we're going to jump right into the topic today. A discussion that's long been had regarding if the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have switched over the years. And I've heard debates and conversations coming from both sides. But over the weekend, I stumbled across this amazing video that breaks down why the so-called party switch is a lie, that completely debunks it or solidly debunks it. So I'm going to share this video, and I'll stop it every now and then to give my thoughts, to give my opinion. And again, I'd love to know what you guys think. Put your comments in the chat. We'll post those and we can dialogue a bit back and forth. Let me know what you think, and we will get this party started. Let me know if there's an echo or anything like that.
Welcome to the Rob Lett Show. I'm your host, Rob Lett. There was no party switch. That's the focus of today's podcast. Well, today I'm broadcasting from Maryland. You probably noticed that the background is very different, but it doesn't change the fact that we've got a lot to unpack here today, because this is a lie that's been going around for a long time, and it's time we finally put an end to all this nonsense. Today, we're going to talk about why 2016 changed everything. We're also going to talk about what one of my favorite TV shows has to do with today's topic. We're going to handle this like a police investigation. We're going to talk about the crime. We're going to talk about the suspects. We're going to talk about the description and also the motive. If it is a lie, which is what I say it is, then what's the motive behind it? Why lie? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the clues that are left behind so that you know it's a lie. We're also going to talk about whether or not the Democrat Party is guilty of anything. And then we're going to summarize it all by talking about why nobody believes in the party switch anymore.
My man Rob does a phenomenal job of really breaking this down. Very, as far as someone who makes videos, a fellow YouTuber, he's artistic in his approach. And Rob, we were trying to dialogue back and forth, but I was unable to get him on, so I decided to go ahead and show his video. Not quite the same, but it's still extremely powerful.
But before we get started, I'd like you to go ahead and do a few things. First of all, like this video, subscribe to it. If you're on YouTube, to the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see a bell. That's a notifications bell. Click it, and it'll notify you the next time we release a new show. If you're on Rumble, though, to the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a share button. Click it, and it'll share this video with a friend of yours who should have been here with us today. Go ahead and do all of those things that apply right now. Before we dismantle a lie, we have to first explain the lie that's being told. Here's what the party switch theory says. The Democrat Party may have been the party of racism a long time ago, but today they have undergone a switch. And today they are the champions of civil rights. Their assertion is in the 1960s, the two parties switched sides, brought about by Richard Nixon's so-called Southern strategy that converted these racist Democrats into Republicans.
Let me know what you've heard regarding the party switch. What are some of the reasons or justifications, kind of bit my tongue there, sorry. What are some of the reasons or justifications or explanations you've heard for the so-called party switch? Put them in the comments.
So today, supposedly, Democrats are the good guys and Republicans are the bad guys. I tell you this not only so you know what the so-called party switch is, but also for you to know that I'm familiar with all of the ridiculous assertions that have been said about Richard Nixon and Kevin Phillips and the so-called Southern strategy. So please don't leave comments for me telling me I don't know about this or that. I've heard all that garbage. I won't be addressing any of that today because complexity is what the Democrat Party have relied on to keep people ignorant. I'm going to make it very easy for you to see by taking a simple common sense approach. Before I dive into this, here's something that should be common sense, but nobody ever says. There's a difference between a party and its supporter. For instance, if you watch my show, you know that I'm a conservative and I vote Republican. But would you go so far as to say that I am the Republican Party? I hope you wouldn't, because that's silly. I am not the party. I'm just a supporter. Back when Bill Clinton was president, I was still young and I knew nothing about politics. I voted for Bill Clinton back then. Well, if I had once voted Democrat, but now I only vote Republican, would you say that the party switched again in the 90s? Also, no. That's ridiculous. As a supporter, I switched who I lent my support to, but understand that both the Republican and the Democrat Party remained intact with their fundamental principles, regardless of what I did. So voters switch all the time. Organizations, parties rarely switch this drastically, let alone two organizations at the same time.
Yeah, that's one thing that's always struck me as kind of odd. Why would two organizations suddenly flip philosophies? It just doesn't make sense, especially when you consider that the Republican Party was founded on the principle of your individual freedoms, which kind of sounds like what they stand for nowadays, doesn't it? And yeah, two parties with diametrically opposed belief systems would suddenly switch. Very odd indeed.
Which is what would have had to happen in order for there to be a party switch. So even before I get started, right there is a chink in their story. But I'll give you my biggest reason for not going the traditional route of explaining this fallacy. It's because I don't have to anymore. See, the Democrat Party has had a deep, dark secret for a long time. If you didn't know their secret, you might just swallow their lie about the party switch. But once their secret came out, it was very difficult to keep up the lie. The lie is that the Democrat Party has tried to hide the fact that they're socialists. You're watching this now and you're probably saying, oh, I know that. Sure, you may know it now, but for a long time, the Democrat Party tried to keep it a secret. Maxine Waters let the S word slip once, and you think she was going to have a seizure because of it.
Guarantee to the American people, because of the inaction of the United States Congress, ever increasing prices unless the demand comes down, and the $5 will look like a very low price in the years to come if we are prohibited from finding new reserves, new opportunities to increase supplies.
And guess what this liberal would be all about? This liberal will be all about socializing, would be about basically taking over and the government running all of your companies.
Why would a professional politician lose their composure over a simple word? What's wrong with saying the word socialize? Even the expressions on her colleagues' faces let you know she screwed up. Then there was the time Jim Carrey was on the Bill Maher show when he said this.
We have to say yes to socialism, to the word and everything.
Isn't that a peculiar phrasing? To the word and everything? He's suggesting that at some point in the Democrat Party's history, there was something wrong with even saying the word. What could have happened in their past that had them so shaken they can barely speak? I'll come back to this later. What I want to address now is why I no longer have to play those silly games that everyone else had to play when refuting the so-called party switch. We no longer have to play those games because 2016 changed everything. A candidate named Bernie Sanders opened the floodgates when he admitted he was a socialist. Notice there are only two parties. Bernie had to pick the party that best aligned with his views as a socialist.
Absolutely, Jim. I'm responding to the comment below. Jim Dixon stated Democrats are communists. That's becoming increasingly true every time you turn around. All you have to do is listen to the rhetoric that flows out of Kamala Harris's mouth. And her dad was a well-known communist. He speaks openly about it. And you can't imagine that it would be impossible for that to have not influenced her values and her views. Just look at some of the things that she says.
He didn't join the Republican ticket. He joined the Democrats. If you want to know more about how the Democrat Party sabotaged Bernie Sanders, find my show called The Truth about our last two elections. But the main thing you should pay attention to is once Bernie Sanders admitted he was a socialist, it was like going to a confessional. Democrats all over the place started admitting they were socialists too. Bernie Sanders, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Andrew Gillum, Beto O'Rourke. Every time you looked up, somebody in the Democrat Party was claiming socialism. And that was the nail in the coffin for their lie about the party switch, because the lie they had hid for so long had finally come to light. One of my favorite shows when I was a kid was a show called Columbo. I used to think that I had a thing for murder mysteries, but it wasn't until I got older that I realized Columbo really wasn't a murder mystery. What made Columbo different is we all knew who the criminal was right from the start. The cliffhanger was figuring out how Columbo was going to prove they did it. I'm not going to handle this like you've seen every other person tackle this subject. I'm going to handle this like a police investigation. You may say police investigation. What's the crime? The crime is racism. That's what Democrats are trying to charge Republicans with. They're trying to charge Republicans with being the party that Democrats were. The founders of the KKK, creators of Jim Crow, discrimination. So that's the charge Democrats are trying to avoid, the charge of racism.
What do y'all think? Do you think they've been largely successful in convincing the public that they are no longer the party of racism? I think they did a pretty masterful job, because it wasn't until recent years, until it became very clear to me that the Republicans were the party that they were founded on the principle of slavery abolition. Like, I never knew that up until maybe 2012, 2013, 14, somewhere around there. That's when I finally realized that. I finally learned that. But they've done a phenomenal job of convincing the public that they are the party for civil rights and for freedoms, and the so-called anti-racist party. But let me know what you think.
Every investigation has to have some suspects. And in this case, there are only two suspects, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. And the Democrats say they're not guilty. My goal today as an investigator is to prove they are guilty. My theory is the Democrat Party today is the exact same party they were in the past. They've just learned to tone the racism down in order to stay in power. But I can't just make unfounded accusations like that. Remember, this is an investigation, and there are two suspects. When the police have multiple suspects for a crime, they usually ask for a description so they can narrow down who the culprit might be. Remember, we agreed earlier, we're not talking about the beliefs and behaviors of voters. We're talking about the beliefs and behaviors of organizations, parties. Let's describe the Republican Party first to see if this could be our guy. They believe in the free market, allowing people to be free to make their own choices. Republicans believe in the Second Amendment, the right for every American to own a firearm for their own self-defense. We're pro-life, meaning the lives of our children are sacred. We believe taxes should be minimal. You should be able to keep most of your earnings for yourself and your family. Does any of this description sound like a slave owner? Do any of these characteristics match the Jim Crow era? I don't see a fit, and I'm really trying to think.
No, I don't know what you think, but definitely not in my mind.
Let's describe the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party believes in the expansion of government in almost everything. They believe in gun control unless it's for government. The government can have as many guns as they want. Democrats are not really fans of free speech. Even today, it's most likely a Democrat who's trying to get you fired for something you said online. Ask Dave Chappelle. They are not pro-life. They believe that there are instances when someone else's life and death can be up to you. They believe the rights of a community outweigh those of an individual.
And they also believe that the rights of an individual, well, some lives, I should say, they also believe that some lives are more valuable than others when it comes to the unborn. And think about that in relation to slavery. One of the primary arguments was that the slaves were considered property, not individual people. Food for thought.
And they despise capitalism. They once proposed a tax rate as high as 90%. Does any of this description sound like a slave owner? Do any of these characteristics match the Jim Crow era? The answer is absolutely. What most people don't realize is black and white water fountains can only be enforced when the government legalizes it. Arresting someone for sitting at the front of a bus, at the front of a restaurant, or for reading a book are all examples of government expansion, which Republicans are against. Eugenics, the elimination of less desirables, was routinely taught and practiced by a woman named Margaret Sanger.
Quick note, especially for those of y'all who follow me on Facebook under Eric L. Muldrow, check it out. I posted early this morning a link to a video on X about a documentary called the 1916 Project, not 1619, the 1916 Project, that discusses the extremely dark and ugly history of Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood. And the information I learned was absolutely stunning. So make sure you take some time out and you follow that. Maybe I'll put the link in the chat, as a matter of fact, as the video progresses. Or if not, follow me on Facebook if you haven't already. So you can see, you'll see that link. I posted it again. I posted it earlier today. Must see content, y'all.
She's the founder of Planned Parenthood, who Democrats fight tooth and nail to keep open today, while Republicans fight to defund it. I could go on, but based on our description, it sounds like we may have our culprit. But why? Every crime needs a motive. Why would Democrats be racist and then lie about it? At the end of the day, whether it's an organization or a person, we do things because it's part of our beliefs. We already gave a description of the suspect. Perhaps it's time to delve deeper into where the principles of the party came from and whether the suspect has any known associates that can help us out. George Fitzhugh is a name that you might not recognize. He was an American social theorist who published a number of pro-slavery social theories in the 1800s. He wrote a book called Sociology for the South. His book is actually the first book in the English language to contain the word sociology in the title. In his book, he wrote, "Slavery," he wrote, "is a form and the very best form of socialism." He continued, proposes to do away with free competition, to avoid protection and support at all times to the laboring class. Keep in mind who Fitzhugh's audience is. His audience are Democrats. This is the 1800s. Keep in mind, even Democrats don't deny that they were once the party of racism. But we already knew that Democrats had a history of slavery. That's not what we're looking for right now. Right now, we're still trying to discover their motive. Why? Why would Democrats engage in such a thing? According to expert George Fitzhugh, it's because slavery aligns with the fundamental belief of Democrats. They believe in something called socialism, which they've been reading about from European socialists. The founder of European socialism was a man by the name of Karl Marx, and a sociologist just like George Fitzhugh, only in Germany and more widely known, also from the 1800s. Without going too deep down the rabbit hole here, socialism summarized is a philosophy that is heavily based on class distinctions between people. In that same vein, it's also a philosophy about oppression and revolution. So American Democrats, being fascinated with this new theory of socialism in Europe, they adopted this philosophy of class distinctions and oppression in order to run the United States. Now, there was a lot that happened in relation to philosophy, but to keep things at a high level, the end result was blacks were enslaved and socialism was the justification for doing so. So we finally have their motive for enslaving people. There was a hot new political theory being tossed around in Germany that American Democrats were intrigued with. Add the explosion of the cotton industry in the agricultural South and the desire to want to implement these philosophies here at home, and you have a mess on your hands.
Big time.
This only answers one of our questions, however. We know where the desire came from, but why cover it up now? Why claim that you were once the purveyors of racism and then Republicans took your place if it were not true? The answer lies in Germany. As you might,
I think the answer is pretty simple. I can't remember exactly what point he makes here, but I think the point is pretty clear. Racism isn't acceptable today. It just isn't. So in order to make their history look a little cleaner, that's when they concocted this idea of a party switch. But I'll let him continue to make his case.
Might imagine if Americans are fascinated with German philosophy, surely there are Germans who are fascinated with it as well. Adolf Hitler was that German. If you've been paying attention, Adolf Hitler and American Democrats now have something in common. This new philosophy called socialism. What many people still don't know is American Democrats and Adolf Hitler had a lot of admiration going back and forth between them back then. As a matter of fact, Hitler used the Jim Crow laws created by Democrats to discriminate against blacks in the United States as a template to discriminate against Jews in Germany. And long before Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger was a specialist in exterminating human weeds. Hitler admired her work in eugenics and how to exterminate the undesirables of society. I'm amazed at how many people either still don't know or don't care to know Margaret Sanger's past till this day. Here, author John Connolly writes he was astonished to learn about Margaret Sanger's past. Connolly writes, "It was with some astonishment that I learned several days ago that Planned Parenthood of Manhattan had decided to remove the name Margaret Sanger from its headquarters and had encouraged other Planned Parenthood affiliates to do the same. The authority cited Sanger's eugenicism and racism as the motives for this dethronement of the iconic founder of the Birth Control League and its successor, Planned Parenthood. Until recently, anyone who cited Sanger in print would be swiftly rebutted by Planned Parenthood apologists who insisted that the charges of eugenicism and racism were false. But stubborn facts and our nation's new scrutiny of our racial history have eroded the mythology of Sanger and laid bare her eugenics project and its racist, coercive details." So we finally nailed down our suspect's motive. Not only their motive for racism, but their motive for this entire party switch lie. Understand, especially after having lost the Civil War to Republicans, the Democrats were the embarrassment of the nation.
Another point to make or to consider is that when it comes down to racism, and two of the most prominent figures in history, especially from the perspective of a Democrat, Karl Marx and Margaret Sanger, Marxism, socialism, Planned Parenthood, abortion rights. They're two of the most racist individuals in recent history. Not even going into detail of how Adolf was intrigued by some of the democratic policies and practices when it comes to in the area of eugenics and things like that, and class distinctions and seeking to eliminate certain individuals from a society. There's a clear line there. Obviously, I'm not saying that the Democratic Party is exactly like the Third Reich, but when you have similar philosophical foundations, it's hard to make that to completely be separate from that. It's hard to completely separate from that. Let's continue.
The Democrats felt they had to rebrand themselves. How do you recover from being associated with Hitler, Margaret Sanger, and Mussolini? How do you survive as a party after a bombshell like that? The answer is you rebrand yourself and you lie.
So that was the motive.
This isn't new, by the way. Criminals since the beginning of time have had the unique ability to be caught dead to rights. You can have the video and the photo of them actually doing the crime that you're accusing them of, and they'll still look you straight in the eye and say,
I didn't do this stuff.
Even Connolly admitted in this article that he was shocked about Margaret Sanger's past. Why? Because Planned Parenthood had denied it so vehemently. But facts are stubborn things. So how's our investigation going? It's going well, I'd say. We've narrowed down our suspects from 2 to just 1, and we've established a motive to disassociate themselves from arguably the most evil man on the planet. But just when you think we're done with our investigation, we're not.
Oh, one thing I almost forgot.
The police don't come get you with just a couple of clues. They gather as many clues as they can before they arrest you.
I'll tell you, in most cases, you don't have any clues. In this case, I got so many clues, I don't know where to start.
And the reason I know most Democrat supporters are in denial is because the Democrat Party have left so many clues that they've never switched who they were. It's impossible not to notice unless you're just purposely looking away. For instance, Hitler despised capitalism and the wealthy. It was his disdain for capitalism that ultimately led him to targeting Jews. Is there a party that despises capitalism today? Is there a party that targets the wealthy class of people every election cycle?
Millionaires and billionaires.
What would define your campaign?
standing up to the billionaire class.
Millionaires and billionaires at the same time.
Millionaires and billionaires.
Millionaires and billionaires.
Millionaires and billionaires. Millionaires and billionaires.
Millionaire and billionaire.
Millionaires and billionaires.
Billionaires and millionaires.
Billionaires.
Just pay your fair share.
It's easy to look at AOC's dress and see the elegance of the gala and wonder, Rob, are you sure this is the same party of slavery, death, and misery today? The answer is absolutely. If you saw my show, Rise of the Black Conservative, you know I revealed something that very few people know. Americans talk about Hitler and dictatorships as though it were something foreign to us, as though it were something that occurred over there. But in that show, I made it very clear that the Holocaust may have happened over there, but there were people with similar beliefs right here.
My name's Marshall Curry, and I am the director of A Night at the Garden, a short documentary that's been nominated for an Academy Award.
Now, my man's video, I think he created this video a year ago, probably longer, but it's interesting. The clip they're about to share is one of the things that was going around recently when people were talking about trying to make the comparison between Donald Trump because he held a rally at MSG, and they said back in 1939, Adolf Hitler did the same thing. So this is going to be that video, not talking about Donald Trump, obviously, but it's the same principle. But I heard it said before, and I'm paraphrasing this, so take it with a grain of salt. But one aspect of, I think it was Saul Alinsky. I think it was something he was quoted as saying, blame the other side of what you're doing, kind of like deflecting. That's something that the Democratic Party has been pretty guilty of in recent years. And this is a prime example.
The film is about a rally that took place in New York in Madison Square Garden in 1939 when 20,000 Americans gathered for a Nazi rally. The whole film is made of archival footage. There's no voiceover, there are no interviews. It sort of parachutes the viewer into this rally and without explanation. And when you first arrive, you see people protesting outside, maybe not so sure what's going on. The marquee outside describes it as a pro-America rally. And then we go inside, you see people marching in with American flags, and there's a huge 30-foot portrait of George Washington. But then you start to look a little closer and you realize that there's swastikas on either side of him, and that the people are holding flags that have swastikas, and they start to do the Nazi salute. And you discover that this rally is sort of using the icons of American patriotism to sell anti-Semitism and hate. You know that if there's a rally where 20,000 people show up, that there are many, many thousands of people beyond that who didn't come out that night but share the philosophy. And I think America in the 1930s, anti-Semitism, discrimination against Jews and other minority groups was the mainstream philosophy, not the majority of Americans' philosophy, but it was a legitimate philosophy.
All of this happened obviously on U.S. soil and during FDR's administration, who was a huge fan of Benito Mussolini. And the director of this film said it best: when you have 20,000 people who show up to a rally, that should let you know there are many, many more who believe the exact same way they do. They just couldn't attend. This was the environment during the FDR administration. I mentioned also that I found it odd that Democrats tried so hard to label Trump a dictator when they know full well there's only one president who served more than 2 terms, and that was FDR. In fact, the only thing that kept FDR from continuing to serve is the fact that he died in office. In 2020, Joe Biden visited Georgia. He made 2 stops. One was to Atlanta, the other to a place called Warm Springs, Georgia. Why Warm Springs, Georgia? Because that's where FDR went when he was sick. This little visit was Biden's way of nodding to the socialists that he was one of them. Joe Biden is honoring the man who was a dictator. He's honoring the man who admired Mussolini. But most importantly, you should recognize this is a Democrat honoring this man today. Here's an interesting clip from Dinesh D'Souza's movie, Death of a Nation.
Check out the official Nazi platform. State-controlled healthcare, profit sharing for workers and large corporations, moneylenders and profiteers punished by death, state control of education, state control of media and the press, state control of banks and industries, seizure of land without compensation, state control of religious expression. This reads like something jointly written by Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders.
Man, when I saw that, when I first saw that, I remember that being really profound. But watching it again over the weekend, that just hit me so hard. What party platform does that sound like? You tell me. I think it's pretty clear.
Read the Nazi platform at the Democratic National Convention, and most likely it would provoke thunderous applause.
In Nazi Germany, Hitler used a terrorist group called the Brown Shirts in order to enforce compliance. Mussolini used the Black Shirts. The Democrats in the old days used to use the KKK. Which party has a uniform terrorist group today?
Think about it. The right is constantly accused of being violent. And what do they typically go to? They'll go to January 6th, the protests, the riots. Even though a lot of that is highly questionable, there are a lot of it is just suspicious. That's the only way to put it. There's a lot of the text messages that were shared were deleted that went around from like the Secret Service, I believe, Capitol Police. A lot of their messages were deleted. The fact that Donald Trump, and this was put out by members of the Intel Committee, Donald Trump had asked for National Guard members because he knew this whole rally was growing. And he wanted to have thousands of National Guardsmen to keep things in order, but Nancy Pelosi rejected it. Honestly, they go back to January 6th as demonstration, as proof that the left or the right is the party of violence. But oftentimes what people fail to realize is that BLM, Antifa, let's back up. During Trump's initial inauguration, there were riots across the country. Cars were burned, police officers were injured, all kinds of violence that took place across the country. You had celebrities appearing talking about wanting to blow up the White House. I think that was Madonna. And you had Johnny Depp talking about wanting to assassinate him. You also, and people often forget 2020, the riots of 2020. While the majority of us were on lockdown, BLM, Antifa members, now there were protests all over the country, all over the world, as a matter of fact. But there were 220 riots across the nation, 220 riots, buildings, homes, businesses burned down, resulting in over $2 billion worth of damage. There were more than 24 people who were murdered during that time. Hundreds, if not thousands, of police officers injured. The reality, and then let's take it to more modern times. Let's take it to who's done the majority of threats of violence or violent protests. At the campuses, you had pro-Palestinian protesters. You had the riots and the threats on the Supreme Court justices' lives when Roe v. Wade was overturned. But I find it funny, or not funny, because I know that the mainstream media, news media in particular, they are the propagandists for the Democratic Party. They have a tendency to want to overlook all of that violence, those massive threats of uprising and burning things down. And what do all these people have in common? The vast majority of them were people on the left. I mean, the devastation that took place in 2020, you had city blocks that were literally taken over. Remember Chaz and Chop? How quickly we forget. But again, January 6th, and I'm not minimizing how horrific that was, but in comparison, in my mind, there is no comparison. The violence that the left has demonstrated in comparison to the right they're not even on the same level, not even on the same page. But we are told to ignore that or forget that because those individuals were, quote unquote, justified.
Again, the Democrats. Don't let the signs fool you. So-called Antifa does not show up to fight white supremacy.
Press, state control of banks and industries, seize land without compensation, state control of religious expression. This reads like something jointly written by Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Read the Nazi platform at the Democratic National Convention, and most likely it would provoke thunderous applause.
In Nazi Germany, Hitler used a terrorist group called the Brown Shirts in order to enforce compliance. Mussolini used the black shirts. The Democrats in the old days used to use the KKK. Which party has a uniform terrorist group today? Again, the Democrats. Don't let the signs fool you. So-called Antifa does not show up to fight white supremacy. They show up to start fights when conservative speakers appear on college campuses. They burned and destroyed property when Trump won the election. Similar to the KKK of old, they defend the interests of the Democrat Party today. Have you ever seen a show when the police suspect someone of a crime, but they want to set a trap just to be sure they've got their man? That's kind of what happened recently. My wife and I went to Stone Mountain, Georgia, and we purposely filmed the mountain as it is today with all of the Confederate leaders on it. I told my wife I'm recording it now because now that the secret is out, Democrats will want to erase some of these monuments because they're evidence that they committed a crime. And sure enough, years later,
near the White House overnight, a tense standoff with police as protesters tried to tear down a statue of former President Andrew Jackson.
It's a racist Confederate statue. Okay, it should be knocked down and put in a museum.
All across the country, statues and monuments being toppled, all under the guise of fighting racism, of course. But it's funny how these statues and monuments being toppled are actually monuments of Democrats. So while some saw these protests as Democrats fighting white supremacy, I saw it as a criminal returning to the scene of the crime to remove their fingerprints for future generations. Look, I could do this all day, but it's unnecessary because the case is pretty damning. The Democrats' entire position is that they're not the same party today. Oh, really? Keeping socialism a secret within your party? They've been doing that today. Having a bunch of socialists within your party? They're doing that today. A uniformed terrorist group? They're doing that today. Election rigging? They're doing that today. Despising capitalism and the wealthy? They do that today. They still believe in a centralized government today. They're still followers of Margaret Sanger today. Followers of Karl Marx today. Fans of FDR today. Still opponents of free speech today. Discrimination against Black people and poor people through their policies today. And
I think my man's making a pretty strong case. What do y'all think?
I don't even have enough time to touch on the undercover sting that Project Veritas did on the Bernie Sanders campaign today, or the Democrat politician who ran for office with a guillotine as their logo today.
You left enough clues to sink a ship.
If Colombo were investigating the Democrat Party for a crime, I'd say it's about time he makes an arrest. Don't you think?
Officer, with this, I think I got a conviction, don't you?
You gotta admit I had you going for a while, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
The funny thing is, we still have Democrat supporters running around, still trying to spread that old, outdated lie, even though nobody believes it. Look on YouTube, type in Party Switch and see how many videos you can find that are pro Party Switch.
Don't worry, I'll wait.
You'll see, nobody's buying it. There's nothing worse than being exposed, but you still think you're fooling somebody. Well, we'll never get it all, but we sure unpacked a lot in this episode. In this episode, we uncovered why 2016 changed everything, how Bernie Sanders exposed the fact that the Democrat Party are socialists today, and they always were socialists. We talked about one of my favorite TV shows, Columbo, and how we were going to use that investigation approach to get to the bottom of what's really going on with this party switch theory. We talked about the crime. We talked about the suspects. We talked about the description. We talked about the lie and the motive of why they would come up with a lie like this in the first place. We also talked about the clues the Democrat Party left behind and whether or not they're guilty. And finally, we summarized everything, hoping you'll understand by now why no thinking individual actually believes in the party switch anymore. Make sure you stick around for our next podcast, What the Left Never Tells You About Jim Jones, because some of you think that story was about a crazy preacher. It was about a lot more than that.
All right, I'll end it right there. When it comes to the video, I should say. I thought my man made a pretty strong case. I don't know what y'all think, but I do want to push back a little bit against one point he made. I think that there's still plenty of people out there who are convinced that there was a party switch, and unfortunately. I've been doing a lot of research on that topic, and the vast majority of videos that pop up initially are proponents of the party switch are claiming that there actually was one. But there are also many videos that state otherwise and that are pushing back against that narrative. Unfortunately, in our society today, many people still get their news from mainstream media outlets or outlets that are extremely one-sided. Now, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with if you're a liberal following a liberal media outlet or a conservative following a more conservative leaning outlet until those individuals start lying to you. That's when it becomes a problem. And that was basically my story. Anybody that's familiar with my story of how I left the Democratic Party, the fact that one of the factors was the fact that the media lied continually in an attempt to make their case. And again, if you have a different ideology, a different view of the world, I can respect that you have that view. But once you start manipulating the facts and the information, then we got a problem. We have a massive problem. But anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts on this video. Make sure if you're watching me live, put it in the chat. But if you're watching this later, comment down below. What do you think? Do you still believe in the party switch? Did you think Mr. Rob Lett, that's his name? Make sure you follow him on YouTube. He's also on Rumble, and he's also on Facebook. So if you can give him a follow, give him a shout out that you appreciated the video. I thought it was creatively well done, and just the content was excellent. He made a phenomenal case. He didn't go the typical route that most people would go in order to debunk this party switch theory. But again, comment down below, share your thoughts. And I'm going to keep it short today, y'all. I appreciate y'all. In the meantime, as always, stay safe, God bless, and make sure you join the conversation. Oh, and make sure you get out there and vote and bring a few people with you. God bless.